is reelected, if the policies that we've labored under for the last 4 years are renewed and extended, I think there's a real grave question about whether there will even be a country left to save by 2016. And I firmly believe, as Ronald Reagan said, the United States is the last best hope of mankind on earth. God has raised up the United States, I believe, for a specific purpose, a primary purpose, and that is to show what a nation that follows the Scriptures and the God of the Scriptures can be, to show how strong it can be, how prosperous it can be, how secure it can be, how stable it can be, how content it can be, how happy its families are, to provide a model for the rest of the world of what a culture looks like when it is steeped in the Spirit of the Lord, the Spirit of Christ, the gospel of Christ. And secondly, to take that good news to the entire world. And over the course of our history, the United States has sent more missionaries to more parts of the world than any other nation in history. So we have, up to the recent past, we have been fulfilling the mission that God has had for us. And all of us see that that is in grave danger right now. And I want to welcome to our decision maker line a very good friend of mine and author of a book, 40 Days Towards a More Godly Nation, Neil Mammen. Neil, welcome back to Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
Thank you, Brian. It's always great to be on your show, especially to be on the show of one of the most hated men in America. I am honored to be with you.
Well, you better be careful. Something might rub off on you, so it's probably a good thing you're coming via phone. But, Neil, I want to talk with you about this book. It's a great book. I've read it. It's actually a book that's sort of been refashioned. Some of our listening audience may have read it as under the title, Jesus is Involved in Politics. But you have retooled it. So tell us a little bit about the retooling that you have done of this book to make it a fit instrument for this time in our nation's history.
Well, when we wrote the first book, it was called Jesus is Involved in Politics. Why aren't you? Why isn't your church? And it was sort of an in-your-face book to people who totally agreed with us and were on this topic and wanted ammunition to be able to engage with their pastors and their fellow Christians on why their pastors or their church should be involved in politics. And it was sort of partisan in many ways because I beat up on Barack Obama. And actually, I wrote the book in 2007. I was beating up on him back then, not knowing that he would become president because I just thought he had said some really weird, strange things, and I thought, wow, if this is the left, we're in trouble. And so people came to me and said, this is a great book, but I can't really give it to a person who doesn't agree with me. We need a book that we can lead our church through that isn't partisan and is sort of lower key. So we said, that's a great idea. Let's do a 40-day series. So we took the book, took out all the partisan comments. We don't beat up on the pastors as much. We kind of assume that they're on our side. And we've designed it such that there's 5 pages a day of reading, and it takes you through most of the book. Much of the same material is covered. You don't lose anything except for the attacks, Mary. And it's a 40-day series, just like the Saddleback 40-day series. And Tim Wildman and I recorded a DVD, so there's 6 study sessions. So the idea is basically you start the 40-day series reading 5 pages a day, and once a week for 6 weeks you have a study group where you go over the Q&A, and there's a study guide in the back of the book. And I want to say, we have a few churches doing this already, and I've been getting emails, and the emails are like, I have to admit I was one of those Christians who had my head in the sand, refused to get involved in politics. I'm on the 3rd day of reading, and I realized how wrong I was. I was surprised because just in 3 days, and when I wrote the book, I hadn't intended it to change people's mind by the 3rd chapter. But what happens is apparently there's enough stuff in there that people are convicted. So I think it's a great series, if I may say so myself.
Now, we're inside the 40-day window, but it's never too late to start. In fact, you can go to store.afa.net right now, store.afa.net, and this resource is available. The book and the DVD is available to you by going to our online store, store.afa.net. You can order a copy of this today. We'll get it right out to you. And you've still got time to be doing some reading and to pull together some friends at work or at church to work through this book together. So go to store.afa.net and get a copy of this book today by Neil Mammen. And Neil, let's talk just for a second about, and we've talked before about some of the content of the book. It's great. Neil is the founder of No Blind Faith. You can get more information about his ministry by going to noblindfaith.com. That's a ministry in apologetics and theology. And Neil does a fantastic job of dealing with all apologetics issues, with cultural issues, sanctity of life, sanctity of marriage, all those issues. It's terrific on that kind of stuff. But Neil, let's talk just for a minute about why it was important to you to redo this book and make it available for this election. What is so important in your judgment as an observer of the American political scene and moral scene, culture scene? What's so important about this election that prompted you to retool this book specifically for this moment?
Well, if you look at the, as you said at the beginning of this segment, where if you start looking at what we have to lose, and the way I phrase it, in fact, on my Facebook, I had a thing that we phrased. It says, now I want you to imagine this. You die, and you get up in front of the Almighty God, and he says this. He says, look, I gave you a nation that was the most sending nation in the world. You have sent more missionaries out than any other nation. I gave you a nation that was the most giving nation in the world. America gives 9 times more than the Germans, 11 times more than the Italians, and that's the next closest. You Americans give $360 billion to charity, and that, when adjusted for GDP, we're 9 times better than the next closest. I gave you a nation where you had freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of all these things, and I also gave you the opportunity in that nation to vote, to elect people who are godly, to do all these things, and you squandered it. You let America become a nation that persecuted Christians. You let America become a nation that didn't give money to the poor because it expected the state to do that, and the state wastes money. And you know, we will stand in front of God, and he will say, I gave you all the opportunities, and you squandered it. How horrible, how mean-spirited, how wicked can we be to ignore all these things that God has given us, and let's squander it and let somebody like Obama, who has turned out to be the most biblically unfriendly president in the history of this nation. I mean, there have been other presidents who weren't Christians and hated Christians, but they weren't able to actually do things as much as Obama has. I mean, look what he's done in the last few years. You know, this whole thing about taking away freedom of religion from churches and Catholic churches. He's allowed people to you can get sued for all these different things, and he's come down and he's cutting out the legs of the church from under it. And believe me, if you don't realize the importance of this, and here's where the crux of the matter is. Even if you don't like Mitt Romney, what you have to realize is when you vote in November, you are not voting for Mitt Romney or Obama. You're voting for the next 3 Supreme Court judges, because that is who the next president has the opportunity to replace. The next Supreme Court judge that is going to come up is a woman, and she's one of the most liberal members, not the most, but one of the liberal members of the court. And she, if she retires to retire, we have a chance of not only overthrowing Roe v. Wade, but also preserving marriage in America. If, on the other hand, she gets reappointed by a liberal, and 2 more judges that are going to come up right after our conservatives, if they get reappointed as liberals, by liberals, and as liberals, what we will end up having is we will cease to see America being the nation that we know it. It will be unfriendly to the church. It will have gay marriage for sure. Abortion will never be stopped. And we have the opportunity to stop this in this election.
You know, Neil, you talked about in the first book, you were a little bit hard on Christians for not being engaged, hard on pastors for not leading their people into political engagement. And, you know, it's a really eye-opening thing for people to read that book and to realize how involved in politics Jesus was. You're not exaggerating when you say he was involved in politics, because the scribes and the Pharisees and the Sadducees were his political opponents. They were politicians. They passed laws. They could that governed the daily life of the people. They could arrest people. They could put them on trial. They could detain them. They could punish them. I mean, they were politicians, and these were the people with whom Jesus was contending day in and day out. So he was involved in politics. He engaged the political leaders of his day. And when people understand that, it just kind of takes the blinders off this whole myth that Christians shouldn't be involved in politics, because our founder was. So why shouldn't we? But to me, there's a flip side to this, Neil. We got a couple of minutes left. If the disengagement of the church explains a lot of why we're in the shape that we're in, the flip side to that is the possibilities, if the church re-engages in the political world, public policy, and takes its rightful place, the possibilities of transformation and renewal in our culture are virtually endless.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, if Barna is correct in the polling, they show there are 60 million conservative evangelicals in America, 60 million. That's not counting the Catholics. And yet the tragedy of that is less than 20 million of them vote. That means 40 million conservative evangelists are not even involved in politics, and they're not voting. Obama won by 9 million in the popular vote. Imagine if we were to get a quarter of those people out to the vote. You know, we always like, well, how do we convince the independents to vote the right way? How do we convince the secular humanists to vote the right way? You know what? We don't need to convince a single one of them. We just have to convince the Christians sitting in the pew next to us that they need to be involved in politics, they need to understand it, they need to vote for godly values. That's all it takes, and that's an easy battle.
You know, and the reality is, Neil, you think about it, that number of evangelicals disengaged, if they all got engaged, the evangelical community all by itself, regardless of what anybody else on the planet was doing, the evangelical community could determine the outcome of every single election at every level in America's public life, starting from school board right up to the Oval Office.
Absolutely, because we have that much. And then when you start adding in the conservative Catholics and the conservative Jews, and in fact the conservative atheists, I hate to say that, but there are, you know, not I hate to say that, but I'd like to add that because I know conservative atheists who are like, well, I don't believe in all that Christian stuff, but I think you guys have a good thing going on here, and we want our freedoms. When you start putting that in, I mean, there is no reason why we should lose a single election.
Our guest on our Decision Maker line has been Neil Mammen. He's author of the book 40 Days Toward a More Godly Nation. Comes with a workbook at the back that you can use for small group study. You can also go to our store right now, online store, store.afa.net. Get a copy of the book along with a DVD, store.afa.net. Not too late to order this thing today and get crack and read this thing that can make a difference between now and November 6th. Neil is also the founder of No Blind Faith. You can get more information by going to noblindfaith.com. That's the Ministry of Apologetics and Theology. Again, Neil, thanks for taking the time to be with us. And that little video endorsement you requested, I'm working on that. We're going to get it to you just as soon as we can. Thanks for being with us, and God bless you, my friend.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate it.
Neil Mammen, author of the book 40 Days Toward a More Godly Nation. Your phone calls and more when we come back. Stay with us.